Thanks for joining us for another edition of The Small Business Show with Cheyenne Malone, exclusively on ASBN.com.
Hi everyone, I'm Cheyenne Malone. Thanks so much for tuning in. So the words that we use impact the people and places that we interact with on a daily basis, right? What if we chose words that are more meaningful and impactful? Are we more likely to get the outcome we desire? Jonah Berger, Wharton School professor and internationally best-selling author, is here to share a few concepts from his book, Magic Words, What to Say to Get Your Way. I like it already, Jonah. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So talk to us about, you obviously have had an extensive career consulting for organizations like Apple, Google, Nike, Amazon, just to name a few. Talk to us about the power of communication, language, and why it's so important to understand, because it's something that we, often take for granted.
Yeah, language is part of everything we do, right? You and I are talking to one another right now using language. Language is how salespeople sell. It's how leaders lead. It's how marketers create advertisements to convince consumers. But while we spend a lot of time thinking about the ideas we want to get across, when we're making a presentation for a meeting, for example, what are the big points that we want to hit? Or when we have a sales pitch, what are the big ideas we want to get across? We think a lot less about the specific words we use to communicate those ideas. And unfortunately, that's a mistake, because subtle shifts in our language can have a big effect on our own impact. Using the right word in a request, for example, can make an audience about 50% more likely to say yes. Rather than saying we like something, saying we recommend it can make people about a third more likely to do what we're interested in them doing. And in all sorts of domains, from the language people might use in, say, a loan application, to the language someone might have in email at the office, provides insight into who they are and how likely they are to do certain things in the future. And so the key question is just, what are these magic words, and how can we take advantage of their power?
And so you talk about magic words and the concepts, right? It's identity and agency. Talk to us, elaborate on that for us.
Yeah, so I talk about 6 main types of language in the book, and I put them in a handy framework to help them be more memorable. It's an acronym that spells the word SPEAK. The S is for the language of similarity and difference. The P is for the language of posing questions. The E is for the language of emotion. The A is for the language of agency and identity. I couldn't come up with a K, so we've got 2 C's at the end. One of those is the language of certainty, and the other is the language of concreteness. And so under each of those is a variety of psychology and behavioral science principles that helps us understand why that language is so impactful, as well as some specific actionable approaches to use it. And so let me give you just one. You asked about sort of the language of agency and identity. Often we think about language as a way to communicate information. But language also says something about what it means to do something and who someone is. So a number of years ago, researchers were interested in how can we be more persuasive? How can we persuade others to do something? And so they went into a little kid's classroom and they asked kids to do something kids are not very interested in doing, which is cleaning up. And for some of them, they used the usual approach. Hey, can you help clean up the classroom? But for others, they took a very slightly, but importantly different approach. They said, rather than could you help clean up, could you be a helper and clean up? Now, the word help and the word helper are basically the same. It's only a couple letters difference on the end. Yet asking people to be a helper led to about a third more increase in people actually helping. And it's not just kids in classrooms. Research on voting, for example, shows that rather than asking people to vote, ask them to be a voter makes them about 12% more likely to turn out at the polls. And so what it turns out about being is it's about the difference between actions and identities, right? We all know we should take certain actions. We should help, we should clean up, we should vote, we should do a variety of things. We're often busy, we don't have the time, but we care a lot more about holding desired identities. We all want to see ourselves as smart and knowledgeable and at least a little bit coordinated, whatever it might be. And so we do things to support those desired identities. And so if we, as requesters, frame actions as opportunities to claim desired identities, people are much more likely to do those things. Rather than asking someone to help, ask them to be a helper, gives them an opportunity to claim that desired thing. Now they're more likely to do it, right? If rather than just voting being an action, voting is an opportunity to show myself and others that I am a voter, well, I'm much more likely to go along those lines. And so by framing actions as identities, we can make people more likely to take those actions and more happy as a result.
Makes sense. I have small kids. I'm going to try that one tonight. So how do we then, take the time to rethink how we're asking questions or communicating? I like how you use, instead of I recommend. How do we do that? Is that something that is, predetermined before we're speaking, or you just kind of take a pause before you respond?
Yeah. So under one of the chapters, I talk a lot about fillers, which are words we often use to fill in times where we don't know exactly what to say, right? So you ask me a really good question, I might sit there going, or I might use ums or uhs as I'm thinking about what to say. The problem is that ums and uhs don't come off very good, and they don't make us seem very certain, which makes others less persuaded by what we have to say. And so just as you said, well, how do we deal with that? And so the first thing is I often, when I work with clients, ask them to take something like we're doing right now, record it, and have it transcribed. And when you take a look at spoken language transcribed, you will be embarrassed about how often we use words like and like. We would never do that in written conversation, right? If you asked me a question in writing and I wrote back, I'm not very sure, you would say, what in the world is he saying, right? Because writing gives us more time to think about and construct what we want to say, whereas speaking is more off the cuff. And so we use ums or uhs to buy conversational time. But it doesn't make us come across very well. And so what we need to do is figure out how to get rid of them. And so first of all, once we've identified them, once we realize we're doing it through a transcript, we can be better off. But second, pausing is a great alternative approach that's much more effective, right? So rather than saying or take a second to think about what you want to say. Obviously, we don't want to pause too long. We pause a really long time. It gets uncomfortable. It makes us seem like we don't know what we're talking about. But our research actually shows that pausing for at least a little bit longer can actually be seen as more positive rather than more negative. People think you care about their questions. You're interested in what they have to say. You're thoughtful and you're thinking through the details. And that can make you look better as a result and make your response better as well.
And you also talk about asking the right questions. It's another component you discuss. How does this help with, building that rapport, strengthening those relationships?
Questions are an amazing tool. We think about questions as a way to collect information, and indeed they do that. They are helpful for collecting information, but they do a lot more than that. They shape how we're perceived, they shape what people think are important, and they shape the direction of different conversations. Some very nice research, for example, shows that too often we're afraid to ask for advice. We think that people will think less of us, that we don't know very much, that we're incompetent. But actually, research shows the exact opposite. When we ask for advice, people like us more, not less. Not only because they think we're curious and interested, but also because they're flattered, right? When you ask someone for their advice, they go, wow, out of all the people you could ask, you asked me. You must have really good taste because I, of course, give very good advice, right? We all think we give very good advice. And so by asking people for their advice, it makes us seem more competent, not less. And similarly, we can use questions to focus the direction of a conversation. Questions are almost like searchlights or spotlights, right? They shine attention on a particular attribute or part of a decision that then people want to behave in consistency with. And, if we're a car dealer, for example, we ask people, how much do you care about the environment? If people think about it and they say, yeah, I care about the environment, well, now they're going to be much more likely to buy an electric vehicle because they just told us that they care about this particular thing and they want to behave consistently with that. At the same time, if you ask them, hey, how much do you care about, I don't know, trunk space, or how much do you care about gas mileage, or how much do you care about performance? Whatever question we ask them, they're going to respond to, but then they're going to behave consistently with what they said before. It's almost they want to commit to what they said previously. And so by asking the right questions, we can shape what they think about, and as a result, the type of decisions that they make.
Makes sense. Are there maybe, 3 things you could give us that we could change today or work on today to be a better and more effective communicator, Jonah?
Yeah, I think the first thing is just recognize that language has a lot more power than we think. Right? I think all of us use language all the time, but we don't think carefully about the language that we're using. And just like any tool, the better tools you use, the more effective your output's going to be. And so I think the first thing would be to pay attention to language and how it works. And there's a lot of tips and tricks in the books about how to do exactly that. And I think the second thing, though, is understand how language affects you as well. Right? The language that others use can persuade us or encourage us to do certain things, if not others. Similarly, companies and organizations can leverage language for insight, right? The language someone uses in email, for example, is a good predictor about whether they're going to get promoted, fired, or leave the company for a better job. The language someone uses in an application for a loan provides insight into whether or not they're actually going to pay it back in the future. not because they sit there and say, oh, I'm going to pay back this loan or I'm not going to pay back this loan, but because language provides subtle insight into who they are, almost like a fingerprint might, and provides insight into how they're going to behave. And so by mining this language data, we can not only make ourselves better off, but we can make our organizations better off as well.
Any final thoughts you want to leave with us and the viewers?
And we all use language all the time, but by better understanding its power, we can all increase our impact.
Well said. Jonah Berger, Wharton School professor and author of his latest book, Magic Words, What to Say to Get Your Way. Thanks so much for your time today, Jonah.
Thanks for having me.
And thanks to all of you for watching.
Thanks for joining us for another edition of The Small Business Show with Cheyenne Malone, exclusively on ASBN.com.